Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the characters' names have been changed to protect privacy. In February 2018, Sarah, a young female photographer from New York, arrived in Los Angeles to carry out a personal project. She chose the Grandview Hotel, name has been changed, an old building located in the city center, because of its affordable price and unique architecture. However, Sarah did not know that, behind its somewhat old and quiet appearance, this hotel hides a dark history, with countless scary stories of mysterious deaths and wandering ghosts. Sarah checked into room 328 on the 3rd floor. The room was quite small and simple, with a single bed, an old desk and a window overlooking the noisy street below. As soon as she entered the room, Sarah felt a strange chill. Even though the hotel's heating system was still working properly, she shrugged, thinking that it was probably because the weather outside was quite cold. After packing her luggage, Sarah decided to explore around the hotel. The long, narrow hallways, lit by dim yellow lights, created a somewhat gloomy atmosphere. She noticed that some rooms were locked, the doors covered in dust, as if no one had been in them for a long time. Returning to her room in the evening, Sarah felt tired after a long day of traveling. She took a quick shower and went to bed, but as soon as she closed her eyes, she began to hear strange sounds. They were very small whispers, as if someone was talking softly somewhere nearby. Sarah tried to listen, but couldn't understand what they were saying. She opened her eyes and looked around the room, but there was no one there. Sarah thought it might be the noises from the rooms next door. But the whispers continued, sometimes sounding like a man's voice, sometimes like a woman sobbing. A feeling of unease began to creep into Sarah's mind. That night, Sarah tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She kept listening to the strange sounds, trying to figure out where they came from. Suddenly, she heard a loud bang coming from the hallway outside. It sounded like someone had just slammed a wall. Sarah sat up with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She tiptoed out of bed and approached the door. Listening, the hallway outside was eerily silent. Sarah opened the door slightly and looked out. There was no one there. Only the yellow light from the hallway cast a shadow on the bare floor. Sarah felt a vague fear begin to creep into her mind. She closed the door and locked it, trying to convince herself that it was just her being too sensitive. But as Sarah returned to bed, she heard a soft but firm knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking came from her own door. Sarah stood frozen, her whole body stiff with fear. She knew that no one was there. She had seen the empty hallway. So what was this knocking? She slowly approached the door, her heart pounding. Who is there? She asked softly. There was no answer. Only the knocking came again, steady and gentle. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she was not alone in this room. There was some terrifying presence here, and it was trying to communicate with her. Sarah remembered the ghost stories she had heard about old hotels, where wandering spirits still haunted the rooms they had stayed in. Could this room 328 be one of them? And could she be the next victim of the hauntings from the past? An overwhelming fear gripped Sarah, making her unable to move, only standing silently listening to the ghostly knocking on the door in the dark night. Sarah stood still as a statue, listening to the knocking that continued to ring steadily. Knock, knock, knock. It was not loud, not hurried, but repeated patiently, as if the knocker knew for sure that she would eventually have to open the door. A series of chaotic thoughts raced through Sarah's mind. Could it be the hotel staff? But what's the matter at this hour? Or maybe a drunk guest got the wrong room. But this knocking sounded too gentle and polite. Not like a drunk person. Fear gradually overcame curiosity. Sarah timidly stepped back, her eyes not leaving the door. She tried to remember the ghost stories she had heard about this hotel. Murders, mysterious deaths. Was it the spirit of one of those victims trying to contact her? The knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah took a deep breath. Trying to calm herself, she decided to look through the peephole before doing anything. Tiptoeing to the door, she gently peeked through the small hole. The hallway outside was as quiet and dark as before. No one was standing in front of her door. Only the yellow light cast a shadow over the worn red carpet. Sarah frowned, feeling confused, and her hair stood on end. If no one was out there, then where was this knocking coming from? She took a step back, her heart filled with doubt. Perhaps the sound was just an illusion caused by her exhaustion and stress. But the knocking came again, clearer and more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. This time, Sarah decided to speak up. "Who is it? Who is there?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer. Only the knocking continued. Sarah's patience was starting to run out. She felt a real fear creeping into her mind. She couldn't explain what was happening. "If you don't say anything, I'm calling the front desk." Sarah spoke louder, her voice now irritated and laced with fear. The knocking stopped abruptly. Sarah held her breath and listened. An eerie silence filled the room. She felt as tense as a string, waiting for something to happen. A few seconds later, another sound rang out, this time not a knock. It was a soft scrape, as if someone was scratching lightly at the door. Sarah shivered. The sound was creepy and haunting. She backed away, pressing herself against the cold wall. Her heart pounded as if it was about to jump out of her chest. She felt an invisible presence just outside the door, and it was trying to tease and intimidate her. Suddenly, the night light on Sarah's desk flickered and then went out. The room was plunged into pitch-black darkness. Sarah screamed in horror. She felt like someone had just blown a cold breath on the back of her neck. She hurriedly groped for her cell phone on the bed, her hands shaking so much that she could barely hold it. She tried to turn on the flashlight on the phone, but the screen only flashed and then went dark. The phone seemed to be broken. Sarah was completely panicked. She was trapped in this dark room with something she couldn't see, couldn't understand. The light scratching sound on the door rang out again, this time louder and closer, as if the other person was trying to scratch through the door to get inside. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back her tears. She felt helpless and extremely scared. She didn't know what she had done to deserve all this. She just wanted to get out of this room, out of this creepy hotel as quickly as possible. But the door was still closed, and the light scratching continued to ring, a cold reminder that she was not alone. The haunting past of the Grandview Hotel had found her, and tonight would be a long, terrifying night. In the pitch black, Sarah groped for the door. She twisted the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She had locked the door from the inside, but now it seemed stuck. Sarah pounded on the door in panic, calling out, "Help! Is anyone there?" The light scratching on the door outside continued, as if the other party was mocking her desperation. Sarah felt a surge of terror well up inside her. She was trapped, completely helpless against an invisible force. She turned around, trying to orient herself in the darkness. The faint light from the crack in the door wasn't enough for her to see clearly. Sarah thought of the window. Maybe she could break the glass and call for help. She groped her way to the window, tripping over a chair in the corner. A loud noise echoed through the quiet night, making Sarah jump. The scratching outside stopped for a moment, then started again, this time sounding angrier. Sarah finally found the window. She tried to open it, but it was locked. She pushed with all her might, but it wouldn't budge. Sarah looked around the room in desperation, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. She grabbed the metal table lamp on the desk. The cold metal feeling against her hand made her shiver. The scratching sound became more and more intense, as if an animal's claws were trying to tear the door apart. Sarah hugged the table lamp tightly to her chest, her heart pounding. Suddenly, the door began to shake violently. There were terrifying squeaks, and Sarah felt as if the door was about to burst open. She screamed in terror, retreating to the corner of the room, trying to shrink herself. The faint light from the crack in the door was suddenly blocked. Sarah saw a shadowy figure pass through the crack of the door, as if someone had pressed their face against it to look inside. She held her breath, feeling as if thousands of ants were crawling across her skin. The scratching stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence. Sarah felt as if time had stopped. She didn't dare to breathe, just staring at the dark door. Then, another sound rang out, this time not a knock or a scratch. It was a cold whisper, echoing from just outside the door, but sounding very close to her ear. "You can't escape," Sarah screamed, throwing the table lamp at the door. The loud impact echoed in the quiet night. She didn't know what she had hit, but she hoped it would make the person back off. There was no response. Only eerie silence filled the room. Sarah felt a surge of despair. She tried her best, but there seemed to be no way to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, Sarah felt a cold hand lightly touch her ankle. She looked down, startled, but saw nothing. The cold feeling gradually spread up her calf, then to her knee. Sarah shivered, trying to pull her leg back, but the invisible hand still held her tightly. She screamed again, trying to struggle, but she couldn't get away. The cold hand tightened its grip, pulling her down to the floor. Sarah felt herself being pulled towards the door, towards the darkness that awaited her outside. In a panic, Sarah tried to hold on to the bed, her fingers tightening on the sheets. She screamed for help, but no one heard. Finally, the cold hand tugged once more. Sarah felt herself being lifted off the bed and dragged towards the door. She tried to resist, but to no avail. She knew she was about to face something terrible, something that awaited her outside the door. In the cold darkness of the Grandview Hotel's hallway, the invisible hand tightened around Sarah's ankle, dragging her across the cold floor. She tried to cling to the bed, her nails tearing at the thin sheets, but it was no use. The invisible force was too great. Nothing could stop it. Sarah screamed in despair, the cries for help stuck in her throat. She knew that no one could hear her. No one could help her escape this nightmare. The sheer terror paralyzed her. She could only stare at the slowly opening door. A dark gap appeared, like a gaping mouth swallowing the remaining light in the room. Sarah felt herself being pulled toward that darkness, toward a bottomless abyss filled with horrors. She struggled, but it was no use. The invisible hand tightened, pulling her closer and closer to the door. Sarah saw the flashlight on the floor. It had fallen from her hand during the struggle. Its weak light flickered and then went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Sarah was completely blind now. All she could feel was the coldness surrounding her and the strong pull pulling her along. She heard the sound of the door hinges breaking as it opened wider, and a blast of cold air hit her in the face. carrying a musty, fishy smell. Sarah was dragged out of the room, tumbling across the cold hallway floor. She tried to call for help, but only let out a choked moan. The long, dark hallway appeared before her, the closed doors silently hiding horrible secrets. The invisible hand still did not let go of Sarah. It dragged her along the hallway. Through the closed doors, Sarah could hear soft whispers from behind those doors. Words of lamentation and pain. She felt like she was being led into another world. A world of wandering souls and terrifying hauntings. Suddenly, the pulling stopped. Sarah lay sprawled on the cold hallway floor. Panting and shaking, she tried to sit up, but her whole body ached and was numb. She looked around, but saw nothing but darkness and closed doors. "Is there anyone? Help me," Sarah called softly, her voice weak and lost. A terrifying silence filled the hallway. Then, from the end of the hallway, a faint light appeared. It was flickering and eerie, like a half-burned candle. The light slowly approached Sarah, and to her horror, she realized it was a shadowy figure floating in the air. The figure had the shape of a woman, dressed in a long white dress that was old and tattered. Her face was pale and haggard, her sunken eyes staring at Sarah with sadness and despair. You're just like us," the woman whispered, her voice weak and plaintive. Trapped, unable to escape, Sarah stared in horror at the ghost before her. She didn't know who she was, but she could feel her extreme pain and loneliness. "Who are you?" Sarah asked timidly. I died here. Many years ago," the woman whispered. "In the room, at the end of the hallway." Then, the woman pointed to the end of the dark hallway. Sarah followed her gaze and felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She knew that there, in the darkness, was a terrible secret. A secret that could explain all the terrifying hauntings she had experienced in this Grandview hotel. And she knew that, no matter how scared she was, she had to discover the truth. Sarah trembled as she looked at the shadowy woman hovering before her. Her eyes were sad and filled with a deep despair, making Sarah feel bitter in her heart. How did you die?" Sarah asked softly, her voice still trembling. The woman let out a soft sigh, a thin wisp of smoke drifting from her body. I was murdered, in room 333, down this hall, a long time ago." Sarah shivered. Room 333. She remembered that it was one of the rooms she had found locked, covered in dust when she first arrived at the hotel. Who did that to you?" Sarah asked, her heart filled with endless pity. The woman shook her head slowly. "A horrible person. He took my life, and trapped my soul here." She looked at Sarah with sad eyes. "Now, you are just like us, trapped, unable to escape?" The woman's words made Sarah feel an overwhelming fear. She didn't want to be a wandering spirit in this creepy hotel. She had to find a way out. Find out what was really going on here. Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking but still trying to sound determined. "And how can I get out of here?" The woman looked at Sarah for a moment, then smiled, a sad and meaningful smile. "Go to room 333. There, you will find the answer." With that, the woman's figure slowly faded into the air, leaving Sarah alone in the dark and cold hallway. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. She looked towards the end of the hallway, where room 333 was that the woman had mentioned. A feeling of dread and unease enveloped her, but at the same time, she also felt a strong urge to discover the secret hidden there. She began to walk down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The closed doors on both sides seemed to be watching her, hiding horrifying stories that she could not imagine. Finally, Sarah arrived in front of room 333. The old wooden door was rotten and covered in dust. A rusty metal room number plate was attached to the door, the number 333 engraved into it like a terrible curse. Sarah timidly reached out to grasp the cold doorknob. She felt a cold air hit her hand, making her shiver. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was dark and damp. The air was stuffy and smelled musty. The weak moonlight shone through the dirty window, illuminating the old and rotten objects in the room. A rickety single bed sat in the corner of the room, the mattress worn and smelling of rotten things. On the dusty dressing table, Sarah saw a broken comb and a few empty perfume bottles. Sarah carefully stepped into the room, her eyes darting around to observe everything. She felt a sense of pain and despair permeate the space, as if negative emotions were still lingering here. Suddenly, Sarah saw a line of scribbled words written in blood on the opposite wall. The words had faded over time, but she could still read them. "He killed me." Sarah recoiled in horror, her heart pounding. She knew that she had found the place where the woman had been murdered. But who was he? And why was her spirit still trapped here? As Sarah continued to explore the room, she discovered an old diary under the bed. The diary's cover was worn and yellowed, but the words inside were still quite clear. Sarah carefully picked up the diary and began to read. The pages told of the life of a woman named Eleanor, who had rented this room in the 1940s. She wrote about strange dreams, feelings of being watched, and a vague fear that always haunted her. The more Sarah read, the more her hair stood on end. Eleanor seemed to have sensed a terrifying presence in this hotel, and she tried to find out about it. The last lines of the diary became panicked and broken, then suddenly ended with a desperate line. "He's coming. I can't escape." Sarah closed the diary, her whole body trembling. She knew that the he Eleanor mentioned was the one who had murdered her and probably many other victims in this hotel. And Sarah also felt that terrifying presence very close, watching her every move. She knew that she was in danger, but she was also determined to discover the truth and free the souls imprisoned in this terrible Grandview hotel. Sarah hugged Eleanor's diary tightly to her chest, a cold fear spreading throughout her body. She knew that the he Eleanor mentioned was not only the one who murdered her, but also an evil force that was ruling this Grandview hotel, imprisoning the souls of those who died here. She remembered Eleanor's words and decided to find out more about room 333. Perhaps, the secret about this terrifying person was hidden right in that room. Sarah carefully walked out of the room and walked down the dark hallway back to room 328. As soon as Sarah entered the room, she was startled to realize that everything had changed. The rickety single bed was flipped over. The things on the desk were scattered all over the floor. The air became cold and stuffy. The musty and fishy smell was stronger than ever. Sarah felt someone watching her. She spun around, but saw no one. There was only darkness in the room, and cold whispers coming from all sides. "You shouldn't know this." A hoarse, hateful voice rang out right next to Sarah's ear, sending shivers down her spine. Sarah knew that the Zlovsa knew she was investigating. She had no time to be afraid. She had to find a way to stop him. She opened Eleanor's diary, searching for any clues that might help her. In the final pages, Eleanor wrote about the strange rituals and terrifying symbols she found in room 333. She suspected that the murderer had performed those evil rituals to strengthen his power. Sarah remembered what the ghost woman had told her about room 333. She decided to go back there and look for the symbols Eleanor had mentioned. With a trembling candle in her hand, Sarah once again walked out of room 328 and towards the end of the dark hallway. When she reached the door to room 333, the door suddenly swung open, revealing a dark and terrifying space. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was now worse than before. The walls were torn apart. The furniture was smashed to pieces. On the floor, Sarah saw strange drawings drawn in blood, the symbols Eleanor had mentioned in her diary. Suddenly, the door behind Sarah slammed shut, and a loud laugh echoed throughout the room. Sarah turned around and was horrified to see a tall black figure standing in the middle of the door. Its shape was twisted and terrifying. Its eyes were red like burning coals staring at Sarah. "Welcome to my room," a hoarse and hateful voice rang out from the black figure. "I have been waiting for you for a long time." Sarah felt a wave of extreme fear wash over her, but she still tried to stay calm. "Who are you? Why are you trapping souls in this place?" The black figure sneered. "I am the ruler of this place. I have taken the lives of countless people in this hotel, and their souls belong to me." He moved closer to Sarah, and she could feel the cold, terrifying aura radiating from him. "You will become one of them too," he said, his voice filled with menace. "Your soul will be trapped here forever." Sarah knew that this was the one she was looking for. This was the source of all the suffering and horror in the Grandview Hotel. She had to find a way to defeat him. Sarah remembered what Eleanor had written about the evil rituals. Perhaps the only way to defeat this terrifying being was to destroy the symbols he used to increase his power. With all the courage she had left, Sarah rushed towards the wall where the strange drawings were drawn in blood. She used the candle to burn the symbols. As the fire flared up, the shadow screamed in pain. His power seemed to be waning. The whispers in the hotel became clearer. The imprisoned spirits seemed to be cheering for Sarah. Finally, when the fire had completely burned away the terrifying symbols, the shadow let out a final, desperate scream and then disappeared into ashes. The room fell into absolute silence. There was no more cold whispering, no more fear permeating the space. Sarah felt a strange sense of peace spread throughout her body. She knew that she had succeeded. She had freed the imprisoned spirits and banished the evil force from the Grandview Hotel. The next morning, Sarah left the hotel, never looking back. She had a night of terror, which she will never forget. But she also found peace and freedom for the suffering souls. If you find this story interesting and want to hear more horror ghost stories, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye and see you in the next videos.